All right, welcome to Racket Live. This is Matt Taibbi, and we've got actually, I was planning on having a whole bunch of stuff up for this live stream, but we may have to just limit it to a couple of stories. In particular, this new FOIA release. We got a whole bunch of documents in last Friday. Just to back up, in the middle of the Twitter files, probably in about February or March, just as Michael Schellenberger and I were beginning to planning to testify in Washington, we got the hint that a lot of this story was going to be about organizations that we didn't have a whole lot of information about, that there were going to be a lot of questions about budgeting, about relationships, and documentation was going to be scarce. An early warning on this front was an Inspector General report where we expected to find funding information about the Global Engagement Center, and then we turned to this page and there was this ominous picture of 39 Global Engagement Center contracts, and 36 of them were blacked out, they were redacted, and only 3 were shown. So we started plastering at that point the entire sort of anti-disinformation space with freedom of information requests. Any university, public university that had any kind of connection to this kind of work, we sent on FOIA requests. We cross-referenced every name that we could think of to try to get information about any one of these programs. We have been going to court when they have pulled the trick, which is quite common in this world, of giving a blanket denial to any FOIA requests, and hoping that we would just drop it. But we planned ahead of time to go to court and to force the government to actually make an argument as to why they were not giving the information over. This is how FOIA works, unfortunately. They force you to show that you're willing to spend a little bit and do a little bit of elbow grease to actually get documents and to have patience. So we expected it to take a long time for this stuff to start coming in, and it has started to come in. So more than 6 months after Michael Schellenberger and I testified in Washington and got information really on the eve of that event about the Verality project, which is the Stanford Internet Observatory's COVID misinformation, disinformation, malinformation program. It was the successor program to the Election Integrity Partnership. We didn't know a whole lot about it at the time, but the significance of it, as explained in this article that published today, was immediately apparent, and let's just go through that. But the Verality project we thought was important right away because it showed the progression of something you might call malinformation. We had heard the concept before. You can actually find definitions of it in Department of Homeland Security websites where they talk about true content, which may produce sort of lead to it's information that's, quote, based on fact but used out of context to mislead, harm, or manipulate. We had heard about that concept, but we had never seen it in action, not in a grand scale, not until the Verality project. And just to quickly review, we found not that much stuff in the Twitter files about this, to be honest. There was a handful of emails, maybe a couple of dozen in total, things that weren't public. But the important exchange was this that we saw to begin with, was this one. First of all, there was an email from a a Stanford person named Jack Cable. And he said, as we continue our work, we would appreciate understanding what content would be most helpful. He asked if platforms are interested in true content, which might promote vaccine hesitancy, including true stories of vaccine side effects or recent celebrity deaths after vaccine or other examples of true things. And the answer that came back was, there was one from a Twitter executive named Joseph Guay, and it said, "Hi, Jack and team," and goes on to list sort of many things that they were interested in, primarily repeat offenders in the platform. And we talked about this before. They had a concept, one of the concepts that was amazing and kind of unsettling was this idea of repeat offenders, which in the Verality Project documents, you see them talking about how content and posts from people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is almost always reportable. So unlike normal speech where litigation where they punish the speech, not the speaker, you commit libel, you have to make amends for the libel, but they don't chain you to a rock like Prometheus and tell you that you can't speak ever again. Internet speech is very different. They actually are looking at you as a person. They make assessments about you, whether or not you're the kind of person who can be relied upon to, relay any kind of information about anything. And then worse than that, if you have interactions with a person who's been deemed a repeat offender or a purveyor of misinformation, that might affect your ability to be retweeted or redistributed. So even giving likes or retweeting something that may not even have anything to do with vaccines, for instance, if you engage with somebody deemed a repeat offender, that might be a problem. So there was that. Then they talked about, yes, we're interested in things like concerns that COVID vaccines are experimental or not officially approved, misuse of official reporting tools. So this is getting into the malinformation area. They're really referring to the VAERS system, the voluntary sort of vaccine injury reporting system. Then there's potentially misleading theories regarding escape variants, campaigns against vaccine passports, inciting fear about mandatory immunizations, and promotion of vaccine exemption cards. So none of this stuff is really disinformation, but it was, you could see how they would consider it that, because from their point of view, they were looking at, how are people going to react to this stuff, where they're going to be more or less excited about getting vaccinated after this. So the sort of true content that promotes hesitancy, true stories of vaccine injury, that was like an important thing that we found, but we didn't learn a whole lot about what exactly they were up to with the Verality Project until we got finally some FOIA productions last week. One of the requests that we sent out was to the University of Washington. University of Washington was one of the 4 partners of the Election Integrity Partnership and the Verality Project, along with Graphica, the Atlantic Council, and Stanford. So we sent FOIAs to University of Washington. We cross-referenced with some names that we knew that were involved in these programs and got some stuff back. And here's the first one that's interesting. It's from Kate Starbird, who is a very vociferous person who is very angry at the various investigations of the anti-disinformation world. You will find pictures of her sort of leaning up against walls in Washington or like maybe on campus and staring balefully off into space, thinking about the horrors of being investigated or having to answer subpoenas or FOIA requests. There are stories about her in the Washington Post and elsewhere. And she writes here, "Thank you very much. I Actually, this is to her. And it doesn't really matter who it's from, but hello all. Thank you very much for your flexibility in finding a time here. This should now be the last update. We would like to discuss the proposed model for the Verality project, including funding, engage interest from each organization engaging in this effort. Tomorrow, we are speaking to representatives from the HHS and Operation Warp Speed, and CISOs, the chief internet security officers at several pharmaceutical companies, to present the coalition and gauge their interests. So, what can you garner from this? Well, they're tossing around their proposals. This is December of 2020. They're tossing around their proposals for the Verality project, including funding. They're speaking to their representatives from government agencies, including the HHS, and to the internet security officers at several pharmaceutical companies to gauge their interest as they think about funding. So there's that. You can infer what you want from that. Then there is a 5-page proposal about what Verality project is going to be. And there's lots of stuff in this that is really, really interesting. And it's kind of fascinating that this stuff hasn't come out earlier, but one of the things they write, who will join this coalition? Public health officials, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the National Association of County Health Officials. That's a great acronym. I always love it when acronyms have more than 6 or at least 6 letters. This world is so acronym filled, and they keep creating and discarding the numbers of acronyms. So it's really frustrating. All right. Then pharmaceutical companies who can provide additional expertise on vaccine side effects and risk. These organizations may also prove important to issuing effective counter messaging. Membership will largely be drawn from the Health Information Sharing and Analysis Center, HISAC. We can get into what ISACs are later, but the Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, that's sort of like the hobby horse of these folks. They have an ISAC for everything. There's an election ISAC, so that's EI-ISAC. But the key here is they're imagining pharmaceutical companies to being key partners, the synthesis of health sector expertise and disinformation researchers. So that's already fascinating. Health sector expertise, pharmaceutical companies and disinformation experts who are basically like ex-intelligence people, or maybe in the best case they're academics who've never done anything before but research different types of digital censorship, what's effective and what's not. Those are your primary partners for this project. Down here, you see civil society organizations such as the AARP and the NAACP. We didn't see a whole lot of their involvement in the Twitter files with this project. Social media platforms to effectively action and disrupt narratives before they take hold. We will carry over the existing partnerships we built with 10 different platforms through the Integrity Partnership. I think this ended up actually being 7 platforms and not 10, but this was still in the planning stage. All right. So in this next communication, this is all part of the same proposal. What are they going to focus on? Now, this is fascinating because I had noticed this before and didn't really think about it. And wondered what the problem was, wondered what I was missing. But there was a certain kind of limited nature to what was going on with the Verality project. When we look through They had, the reports were basically public. You can go find them. If you go to veralityproject.org, you will find the weekly reports that they sent out to all the different platforms. But what were they interested in? Well, I'm going to start at the end. This list may evolve as narratives emerge and our understanding of the key challenges grow. We will not engage with general COVID-19 disinformation, including genetic conversations about lockdown decisions, mask wearing, false cures, or the severity of the virus itself. So they're not interested in general misinformation about COVID, even though this is ostensibly a COVID thing. What are they interested in? Attempts to undermine or decrease the uptake of COVID-19 vaccines that have received approval for distribution by U.S. health authorities or global health authorities such as the WHO. All right, and things that they're concerned about are anything that's calling into question, that might decrease your enthusiasm for getting the vaccine. So that includes the vaccine contains government microchips or recasting expected side effects or extremely rare reactions to undermine the perceived safety of COVID-19 vaccines. Why is this important? This is important because it turns out that the Verality project, it looks like, was designed, and we would need more information for them to know this for sure, but they were looking at working closely with the pharmaceutical companies, and their emphasis was almost 100% on vaccine hesitancy and on groups that were campaigning against vaccines. In fact, they had as part of their proposal, they talked about groups that had been effective at and having fought against state level legislation and built coalitions with those who believe that vaccine requirements are government overreach. Such a coalition, they said, could create a political and media dynamic that might, quote, erode confidence in the COVID-19 vaccines that come to market. So this is it's basically like a corporate, it's like a blend of corporate and government censorship, where the whole idea is to get people to prevent any kind of messaging that might undermine your desire to consume or take the vaccine. They're not interested in anything else that might actually kill people. Old folks, will wearing a mask prevent you from getting COVID? Should you be sheltering in place with a whole bunch of other old people who are also at risk? I mean, they just weren't interested in any of those questions. They were interested in getting people to take the vaccine. That's it. But they weren't interested in getting people to take any vaccine. It had to be American vaccines. So there's another section of the proposal. Foreign actors will use a combination of overt and covert methods to undermine U.S. efforts to vaccinate its population. Overt state media such as RT and Sputnik have already begun to establish narratives bolstering Russia's vaccine and attacking the Pfizer and Oxford vaccines. Now, we did end up seeing in these reports sort of references to news stories. Sometimes they came from Russian sources that just talked about how this Sputnik vaccine was working. And they didn't like that. They were tracking that as misinformation, even though relatively early, and I'll go here just for a second just so you can see. You had stories like this in Nature magazine. Mounting evidence suggests that the Sputnik COVID vaccine is safe and effective. So scientists weren't exactly telling you not to get the Sputnik vaccine, but these folks were, because why? Well, we can't say for sure, but partnering with pharmaceutical companies sure makes me think that might have had an impact on what kind of disinformation they were really interested in here. Going on further, what are some of the tactics we expect to see? Now, this is interesting because I had never seen this before. It's the last entry, and it's an obvious thing, but we just hadn't seen it coming from these would-be censors. What are some of the tactics we expect to see? Domestic actors will spread misinformation both wittingly and unwittingly. And then down here, overly punitive moderation frameworks that focus primarily on taking down content will not reduce demand for that content, and may result in significant subsequent interest in the, quote, forbidden knowledge. So this is the Streisand effect. This is like what everybody, every sort of anti-censorship person has always said since the beginning of time, that if you do this, if you censor things, if you take them off the internet, it's going to drive up interest in it, and people are going to rush to the forbidden thing, and they're going to go do that even more than they would if you just left it alone, or just treated people like adults and said, okay, go ahead and look at that, but I've got an answer for that. They were conscious of this, and that's why we did see lots of de-amplification or requests to sort of denialist people or tone things down. We saw in the Facebook files, there's a request to reduce traffic to one of Tucker Carlson's videos by 50%. So that shows you that they were conscious of the Streisand effect. They were conscious of what it would look like if this were interpreted as censorship. Even as far back as 2020, they were thinking about that. All right. Now, in addition to that, the last page of the proposal contained a very detailed graph of the potential workflow of the Verality project. There are a lot of things that are going to be interesting to anti-disinformation geeks and people who spend their lives obsessing over this topic like me. You can see that the four kind of quasi-private partners are up here. That's First Draft, Stanford, the Center for an Informed Public at the University of Washington, and CSM&P. I'm not sure. I think that might be the NYU program. Anyway, you see down here, they talk about how the misinformation comes in. Analysts have a daily on-call shift to respond to the incidents. Incidents are consolidated into key narratives, sent to a manager with a recommendation for external communication. These are sent to the platform partners, sometimes in the forms of JIRA tickets, which we saw in the Twitter files. And then simultaneously, they would go to the health sector partners. And this included some members of industry, but also the CDC. So you have the weekly summary reports of all incidents with suggestions for action are sent to health sector partners. Per incident communication will also be leveraged. Sorry, let me increase the size on that for people to see. Per incident communication will also be leveraged for urgent matters. Why does this matter? All right. By the way, yes, I see the graphics are too small, so I'm going to make them larger. And I appreciate comments like that. Look, this is not my thing. I'm not a broadcaster. I'm trying, but this is a new way. I think we got to try to get the word out on this stuff. So, let's take all the suggestions. We'll see if we can get me good at this. within a couple of weeks. And I appreciate everybody who's patient with in the meantime. So, health sector partners, this is significant. Why is this significant? Because it shows that a government agency, the CDC, is in the middle of the workflow process of this censorship program. Now, we knew the Verality project was a cross-platform thing that was potentially problematic for many reasons, because there's some antitrust issues going on in there. But the government involvement in the Verality project was always a little bit mysterious. I mean, they talk about in the report working with the Surgeon General's office, and there are some other partners who were sort of listed as partners or maybe as founding partners, but we don't see them in the middle of the workflow. So this document, it looks significant to me. It looks significant to some other folks I showed it to today. They haven't commented on it, what exactly it means. So we can't say for sure what it is. But that looks to me like the CDC is in the middle of the workflow of a content moderation program that involved an enormous quantity of stuff, of posts. So there's that. Now, after this proposal, and I'll just speed through this, there were a couple of responses. One of them was from a researcher, a pretty well-known anti-disinformation person who I'm going to be nice about for the time being. They haven't formally told me to go F myself since I reached out about a possible interview on this subject. So I'm not going to out the person yet, but there's a letter back to the Verality Project founders with some comments and suggestions about concerns. Now, the first few comments are just funny. I mean, it's hard to put it any other way. Having been shown this Orwellian, creepy, cross-platform, secret censorship thing that's got government agencies in the middle of it, what's the immediate concern? The immediate concern is that they broke down their analytical groups into communities, and this person thought there were missing communities. Religious communities should be included. Well, that's not so bad, right? I mean, okay, religious communities should be included. They didn't do that, but it's nice that this person thought that should be done. I would like Black and Latinx communities expanded to include communities of color / BIPOC. Often Asian Americans and indigenous peoples get left out of work like this, but there can be misinfo in these areas as well. Now, the funny thing about this, I mean, it's not so funny, but these efforts were roundly criticized for not doing enough to reach out to communities of color. So the suggestion here, reading between the lines, it's like, let's bring in some BIPOC folks so we can figure out a way to address the misinformation in that community. I don't think it was about diversity on the team. I think it was about finding new ways to reach out to different communities where they may be suspicious of getting the shot for a variety of good reasons. But whatever, that's that comment. Then there's this obviously very deeply important comment. How do we disentangle, if we want to disentangle, say, the intersection between conspiracy and right-leaning? Marjorie Taylor Greene, missing the E, could fall into both. What about Candace Owens? Yes, what about Candace Owens? This is the eternal question. I mean, it's incredible that people with advanced degrees are thinking like this. Is she right-leaning or communities of color? Does she only count as a community of color by her racial identity, or only if her content gets spread by other Black people? So there's that. Then do we want to track misinformation in communities of color by following certain media outlets and notable celebrities? How do we bound? For example, should I start following BET or rappers? As the Russians would say, I'm just going to leave that one without commentary, but it's interesting. Okay, so having made these rather, I would say, odd comments, the person moves on to this, and this is central to the whole thing: vaccine misinfo. And let's jack up the font so everybody can read it. One question that has probably already been answered is what content is made into a ticket. By that, they mean a JIRA ticket, like an individual incident. In my opinion, there is a difference between vaccine-opposed information, which can get around moderation. By that, this person means it can get around moderation because it's not wrong or fake, and vaccine misinformation. What's the difference between vaccine-opposed information and vaccine misinformation? Are we flagging anything that pushes a vaccine-opposed ideology regardless of its truthiness? Examples can include vaccine injury stories, VAERS data, and court cases. What gets labeled, I think we should be careful, especially so things don't get taken out of context with all the media around the project. Dun, dun, dun. That was a little prescient. What gets labeled as vaccine misinformation versus vaccine-opposed misinformation that promotes distrust in the COVID vaccine? So, this is central to the whole thing. This person was raising the problem with the Verality project and all these projects, which is, are we going to restrict ourselves to things that are actually wrong? Or are we going to venture into areas where the problem isn't true or false, fake or not fake, but really politically expedient or not politically expedient? Malinformation, what we saw a glimpse of in last year's or the stuff we got earlier this year, the true stories that might promote hesitancy. Well, that's the key to the whole thing, is they start off with something. And again, I'm going to go back just quickly. This is sort of the last thing. This is the pattern every single time. They start off by listing things that are sort of uncontroversially dangerous or stupid or genuine misinformation, right? So this vaccine contains government microchips. Another example, I took today from NewsGuard is, let's do a fact check on whether Israelis are actually drinking the blood of Palestinians. Okay, we can do that. I don't know how prevalent those stories are, but that's what's going on. So, but they start with that, and then very quickly what they'll do is they'll move into a new definition of misinformation, which is basically anything that undermines the vaccine, anything that undermines the only plan that they were considering in terms of health care for the vaccine, which is get the vaccine during COVID. So they weren't interested. They say this in the documents. They were not interested in other things. They weren't interested in questions about masking or the lethality of the virus or any of those other things. They were interested in the vaccine. They were interested in making sure you got your shot, and that's it. And when this person raised the question of, are we making a distinction between vaccine-opposed information and disinformation? The answer clearly came back not to that person's liking, because very quickly the person said that they had to redefine their participation in the project. And then we saw the documents, probably a month later, came the emails that we found in the Twitter files, which show that they just sped past all those concerns and went straight into the malinformation model, which is, true stories that promote hesitancy. Yeah, that's what we want. We want to consider that stuff. And that's what they did. So, in sum, and this is sort of a last note, there's other stuff in these FOIA documents, including about the origins of the Election Integrity Partnership, which we were interested to find out was originally called the Election Disinformation Partnership, but they ended up shelving that one because it could very easily be made to sound like we are spreading disinformation. So they went with election integrity. But anyway, there's that. There are some recommendations. What do we do? We're getting all this negative stuff in the media from now on. And if any reporter calls anybody who's in the project, it's got to go to 1 or 2 people at Stanford. We see some stuff like that. We'll post all of these documents, and we're going to have collections of them as they come in. But the key thing is, this is how the Freedom of Information Act works. You file your queries, and then maybe 7-8 months down the road, after a long and painful fight, you start to get stuff. And there's more stuff to get with this. And there's more stuff that gets cross-referenced with this in some other batches. But I thought it was important to go through it. I didn't have time to make a full-blown social media thread, but I thought that it would be good to go through this. A couple of questions I see right here. Hang on a second. Have I covered the Vermin topic yet? No, but I'm going to, because Matt Orfolia did a piece on it today on his site, and that is a fascinating story. There's 2 things about this story that are amazing. The Vermin thing, and I'm gonna release something short about this tomorrow. But for those who missed it, Donald Trump made news. Here's how news works in the Donald Trump era. Donald Trump says something dumb or says something provocative. Everybody in media spends the next 24 hours acting like they just watched Old Yeller get killed. And then there's a succession of headlines that can last anywhere from a day to 30 days, like Hitler kills Old Yeller, and they just keep recycling that headline over and over again. And in the case of the Vermin story, which began with Donald Trump on Veterans Day talking about how if he gets elected, he's going to root out all the left-leaning thugs in the Vermin. And after he did that, initially, sites like this one, the Daily Beast, they didn't realize this was a Hitler cue. Like they saw Vermin and somehow made the amazing, forgot that this was a way to kick off a good month of Hitler headlines. So they left it alone. And but then a day after that, there was a news story by a think tank called the Midas Touch, where the headline, and the Midas Touch is like a Hollywood-based political action committee whose biggest donors listed include, the biggest listed donor is Bette Midler, and then like third in line is Reid Hoffman, the billionaire whose name keeps popping up in sort of Zelig-like fashion in all of these anti-disinformation programs. But in any case, this little website, this political action committee that's run by a bunch of young whippersnappers who work as post-production people on shows like Ellen DeGeneres and in Hollywood, they ran a headline: Trump echoes Hitler, threatens to rid America of vermin from within. Then you got Trump next to Hitler, like incredibly creative stuff. And then after echoing Hitler in his Veterans Day post on his social media account, Trump then made near verbatim comments in Claremont, New Hampshire. And then after that, it's this incredible sort of avalanche of Trump echoing Hitler headlines. I mean, Orff, who is Matt Orfalea, who's obsessive in the right way for this kind of work, he tracked it. The Washington Post did 18 stories on this, has done 18 stories on this alone since it came out, and it hasn't even been a month yet. We so far, I'm counting above 50 stories that have the Trump echoed Hitler, or Trump echoes Hitler. Joe Biden said Trump echoed Nazi propaganda twice in the same paragraph in an appearance. Jimmy Kimmel says it. This is like the formula for media now. Trump says X, then there's sort of crazy reaction to it for a day, and then it just generates endless amounts of content. But once upon a time, when this happened, media people would at least bother to change the individual wording of their stories. Now they're just going straight to using the same lines over and over again, and kind of amazing. And then the punchline to all of this is that it turns out that that all of these groups, well, especially the Washington Post, had been using, had described, for instance, Trump as and Trump figures as vermin, going back years. But of course, that's different because God knows why. So let's see if we can find an example. Yeah, here we go. So this is from the Orff report, came out today. There's even a whole genre of art that came out of this, where people are making these sort of Daumier-esque representations of Trump and his supporters as rats and vermin. Some of them are quite well done, I would say. The only thing is that if you're going to do that, you can't be wigging out later when somebody else says effectively the same thing. So yeah, this was a kind of an amazing situation, and I'll have more on that on Racket tomorrow. But we got other stuff on Racket. I meant to have more stories out today, but just got caught up on the FOIA thing. But this is this is real stuff. I know everybody's a little tired of the anti-disinformation thing, but this is how these stories work long term. They take a long time. You have to spend a lot of time doing it, and you got to put it out when you get it, and hope that it shakes something loose. So I appreciate everybody's patience in following along with all this stuff. Hopefully next time I do one of these, it'll be something a little sexier, more interesting. For this question, I will answer while I'm here. To Richard, what happened at your town hall last week? Two things happened that were funny. It was great. It was a great event. Thank you so much to Matt, who was the Brooklynite who set up the event. Basically a full event at the Montauk House in Park Slope. Things were, I was kind of hoping that haters would show up. They didn't really, until during the Q&A period, there was somebody who stood up and gave what I'm pretty sure was a performance art thing, where he talked about how his trans dad, grew up in this neighborhood, and she would have been appalled by the hate speech that I was spewing. Those were the first 2 lines of the speech. And then when things kind of broke down and got a little bit too logical, there was a kind of a primal scream, and then the person disappeared but left the script on the floor. I'll publish it if y'all want. It's I think it's actually pretty inspired piece of crazy writing. So that happened. Otherwise, it was just a really great discussion about the First Amendment. A lot of folks, it was kind of inspiring listening to, young and old, came out to talk about that. And then at the very end, I got interviewed. Some folks from Wired magazine tried to give me a hard time because one of the 50 slides that I showed had a section up top with a highlighted portion that I was trying to talk about, where a member of the DHS's misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation committee was talking about doing things to empower populations to resist despair-inducing MDM. So things that make you despair-inducing malinformation, which I thought, it struck me like is everything that I've ever written. It's true. It makes you sad. Anyway, I mentioned that, but there was some stuff at the bottom of that email that was kind of, let's just say anodyne. There was just some basic information about DHS and CISA doing cybersecurity work. And this guy gave me a hard time because there was something harmless in a slide that I wasn't bringing attention to. So he was, I guess, trying to say that there was something wrong with the evidence. I said, no, I was talking about something else in that slide, but whatever. And then after the event, he came up to me and tried the question again, and I lost my temper with him. So everybody can expect that there will be an unpleasant story about me and Wired coming up fairly soon. And but that's okay. That's how this works. So I used, let's say, some colorful words with this person, and I'm sure they will appear somewhere on a social media platform sooner or later. Oh, here we go. This is from Carly. I talked to the Andy Kaufman adjacent person afterwards a bit. He wanted a hug and seemed very genuinely sad about the internet. Well, if it was genuine, folks, I got to say that was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. And I'll publish the speech. You can be your own judge about this. But Carly, thank you for the comment. We took a vote afterwards. It was split right down the middle. Half of us thought it had to be like an Andy Kaufman type thing, and half of us thought it was genuine. So maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. Anyway, folks, thanks so much for hanging in here. I didn't mean to keep you on this long about this, but I appreciate you checking out this topic, and please spread the word about these documents with relation to the stuff that came out last year with the Twitter files. This is a bit of an advance of that story, and the participation of pharmaceutical companies in this project would be pretty significant, especially if the field is narrowed the way it looked to be narrowed for that reason. And we have to start thinking about the possibility that censorship is being done both for corporate interest reasons and governmental reasons, and there's a lot to think about with this. So thanks anyway, everybody, for hanging in there, and tune into Racket tomorrow. There's a whole bunch more content coming. I just put out something where I got a new thing where I'm fact checking NewsGuard because I'm kind of annoyed that they're fact checking me and other people, and so I've decided to start doing entries based on their content. If I think that a thing lacks context or omits key information, I might say that. So I rate all of their internal subscriber-only content based on a scale of 0 to 4 Satans, and the first 2 entries are out right now, but there'll be more out tomorrow. There's a bunch more stuff coming, and there's some stuff coming with ORF too, which is great. So see you all tomorrow. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I'll talk to you soon. All right, take care.